Single dad delivered groceries to the wrong door. The woman, in a silk robe, said, "Stay for tonight." The rain had a rhythm that night, a sharp, unrelenting beat on the windshield matching the pounding in Daniel's temples. He gripped the steering wheel, squinting through the downpour at the GPS, blinking delivery 6 of 6. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A message from home. Maya's temps down a little. "Don't worry, she's sleeping now." Linda. Linda was the neighbor who watched Maya when Daniel took late shifts. He trusted her more than anyone else left in his life. Still, it was 10:54 p.m., and this was the third night in a row he'd been out past her bedtime. The building rose above him like a silver monument, lights glowing through sheets of rain. Langston Residences. A luxury tower? Daniel shook his head and grabbed the insulated bag from the seat. Groceries, gluten-free bread, almond milk, chamomile tea. Who orders tea this late? Inside, the concierge barely glanced at him as Daniel showed his delivery ID. Apartment 1603, he muttered to himself, stepping into the empty elevator. He jabbed the button for the 16th floor, but the elevator lights flickered and stuttered, then stopped at 19. The doors slid open. He hesitated. The hallway was lined with framed minimalist artwork, silent as a chapel. He double-checked the screen. It still said 1603, but maybe this was one of those buildings where floor numbers didn't match unit numbers. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's just get this done." He stepped up to 1906, the number gleaming beside a sleek black door, and knocked. A soft shuffle inside, a click, and then the door opened. She stood there barefoot, wrapped in a silk robe the color of ash, rose her hair falling loose around her shoulders, damp from either a bath or tears, he couldn't tell which. Her eyes were red-rimmed, makeup smudged. A shattered wine glass lay just beyond her feet on the floor. The sharp scent of Pinot Noir hung in the air, and yet what hit him wasn't the glamour or the mess. It was the loneliness. Thick, choking, tangible. Her voice, hoarse and barely above a whisper, broke the silence. "Stay. Just for tonight." Daniel blinked. He started lifting the bag. "I think I have the wrong apartment." She stared at him like she hadn't heard. Or maybe she had, she just didn't care. Then her eyes dropped to the bag in his hands. "You're not the concierge," she said flatly. "No, ma'am. I'm just delivering groceries." He offered a tentative smile. "Sorry to disturb you." She looked down at the broken glass behind her, and for a moment something shifted in her expression. Not embarrassment, not anger, just weariness. She stepped aside wordlessly and bent to begin picking up the shards with her bare hands. Wait, don't," Daniel said, stepping in before he realized what he was doing. "You'll cut yourself." She blinked at him but didn't stop. Daniel set the bag on the marble counter and reached into a sleek drawer, pulling out a towel. He knelt beside her, carefully collecting the pieces, mindful of her hands. She froze for a second, like she wasn't used to someone helping, then quietly let go. When the last shard was in the towel, he stood and looked at her. "Do you have a broom?" She gestured vaguely toward a hallway. He moved on instinct, found the closet, swept the glass. Even wiped the wine from the floor with the precision of someone who cleaned up too many messes that weren't his. When he came back, she was standing still, arms crossed over her chest, watching him like he was an alien. "You didn't have to do all that," she said. "I know," he replied simply. Silence. Then a chuckle, dry, brittle. "I forgot people like you exist." Daniel tilted his head. "Like me. Strangers who help without asking why." He didn't know what to say to that. So he didn't say anything. "I ordered those groceries," she said finally. "For myself. Thought I'd feel human again if I ate something that wasn't reheated regret. Guess I missed the floor on that, too." Daniel smiled faintly. "I think I missed it first." Another silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. "You want some tea?" she asked. "It's the least I can offer." He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, as long as you're not still planning to stab yourself with glass." That startled a laugh out of her small reel. She moved into the kitchen, filling the kettle. The place was too large for one person. Gleaming granite designer lighting, but cold like a hotel room meant to impress guests who never came. "I'm Daniel," he said, just to fill the air. She turned. Vivian. Vivian. It suited her, elegant, guarded, and exhausted. "I'm sorry," she added softly. "For earlier, I thought you were someone else. My assistant. Or my ex. I don't even know. No need to explain." But she did anyway. "It was our wedding anniversary today." Daniel glanced at the wine bottle. Empty. Uncorked hours ago. "He's remarried now," she added, matter of fact. "You'd think I'd stop caring." "Some dates stay inside us," he said gently. "Even when the people don't." Vivian met his eyes, and something between them shifted, subtle but undeniable. The kettle whistled. They sat by the window sipping tea rain tracing silver threads down the glass. They didn't talk about love or loss, or why two strangers were sitting in the quiet of a luxury apartment at midnight. They didn't have to. When Daniel finally stood to leave, Vivian didn't stop him. But as he reached the door, she said softly, "Thank you, Daniel, for treating me like a person. Not a headline, not a charity case, just a person." He smiled, nodding once. And as the door closed behind him, Vivian leaned against it with her eyes shut while Daniel walked back into the rain, unsure what had just happened, only that something in him had shifted too. Something small. Something real. The next morning brought a different kind of silence. Vivian sat at her kitchen counter, the untouched chamomile tea still cooling beside her, staring at the sleek screen of her phone. There were no new messages. Not from Martin, not from her assistant, not from anyone who actually mattered. But her thoughts kept circling back to Daniel, the man with kind eyes and calloused hands who had knelt beside her to clean up broken glass like it wasn't beneath him. Like she wasn't broken, too. She opened her food delivery app, scrolled through past orders, and found the receipt. There it was, order number 8763, delivered by Daniel Brooks. The apartment number on the app, 1603. He really did knock on the wrong door. Vivian didn't know what compelled her, but her fingers hovered over the contact link. Just a simple thank you would be enough. Or maybe not. Maybe nothing would be enough to repay someone who stepped into a stranger's darkness and lit even the smallest candle. She closed the screen and pushed the phone away. Some names didn't need to be called twice. Daniel wiped his hands on a towel and stepped back from the engine bay of a worn-out Chevy. It was still early, but the shop was already buzzing wrenches, clinking phones, ringing someone in the corner, arguing about a part delivery gone wrong. He liked the noise. It covered the thoughts. But Vivian's voice lingered like a soft echo just beneath the clatter. "Thank you. For treating me like a person." He hadn't expected that night to matter. But it had. Somehow. "You're zoning out again," said Nate, the owner of the garage and Daniel's friend since high school. Nate tossed him a bottle of water. Late night, Daniel smirked. Delivery ran long. "Yeah." "She tip well." Daniel shook his head. "She didn't tip at all. Just made me tea." Nate raised an eyebrow. "That's new." "Pretty." Daniel gave a non-committal shrug and took a swig of water. "You're a terrible liar, Brooks." That afternoon, Daniel had just picked up Maya from school when his phone buzzed. Same building, new order, different apartment this time, 1603. He frowned. What were the chances Maya was holding her art project, a crooked but colorful papier-mâché turtle, and was bouncing beside him? "Can I come with you? I want to see the tall building again." Daniel hesitated. He normally didn't take her on late deliveries, but this wasn't late. And after last night, something about returning felt unfinished. 15 minutes later, he stood outside apartment 1603 Maya at his side, holding the grocery bag. He rang the doorbell. A tall, older woman answered. Polished, professional, her expression cool. "I believe this is your order," Daniel said gently, nudging Maya forward. The woman took the bag with a small nod. "You're not the usual guy." "No, ma'am." Daniel smiled. "I was last night, too, just for the wrong apartment." The woman gave a tight, uninterested smile. "Well, thank you." The door clicked shut a moment later. Maya looked up at her dad. "That was kinda rude." Daniel chuckled. "Not everyone's having a good day, Peanut." As they turned toward the elevator, another door opened. 1906. Vivian. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of them, especially Maya. Daniel offered a sheepish wave. "I figured I'd get the floor right this time." Vivian stepped out into the hall barefoot again, but this time in jeans and a soft blue sweater. Her face looked rested, if still wary. "I thought I heard your voice," she said. "This is Maya Danielle, introduced as the little girl beamed. My daughter, my boss, my alarm clock, and occasionally my moral compass." Vivian smiled. "Hi, Maya. I'm Vivian." "You're pretty," Maya said without hesitation. "Are you sick?" Daniel groaned internally. Vivian laughed, a real surprised laugh. "No, sweetie. Just had a tough week." Maya tilted her head. "My dad says when I have a tough day I should drink cocoa and talk to people I trust." Daniel flushed. "She also tells strangers exactly what I said at home, apparently." Vivian looked at him with something softer now. Not amusement, not gratitude, recognition. "I was just about to make tea," she said, voice gentler than the night before. "Would you like to come in? Both of you." Daniel hesitated, but Maya looked up at him like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can we, Dad? She seems lonely." Vivian looked down at the girl with a flicker of emotion that nearly cracked her composure, then stepped aside. Inside, Maya took to the apartment like a curious kitten exploring, asking questions, marveling at the way the lights dimmed automatically and the couch didn't have any stains. Vivian made tea, and the three of them sat by the window again. This time, it wasn't raining. The city was gold and silver, the sun low, the streets glowing. Vivian asked Maya about school. Maya told her about art class, her turtle, and how she missed her mom sometimes, but it was okay because her dad made the best pancakes on sad mornings. Vivian's gaze flickered to Daniel again. This was not the man tabloids would care about. He wasn't powerful or rich or scandalous, but he was solid, present, and true, and somewhere in the noise of her world that had become the rarest thing of all. When it was time to leave, Maya hugged Vivian's waist like she'd known her longer than 20 minutes. "I hope your heart feels better," she whispered. Vivian stood there long after the door closed, her arms crossed over her chest, the warmth of that tiny embrace lingering like perfume. In the elevator, Maya leaned into her father's side. "Dad," she said, "I think you should marry her." Daniel laughed, but there was a crack in it like something inside him had shifted, just a little more than he was ready to admit. "Let's get through dinner first, okay?" But his heart was still in that hallway, still at the door, still open. Vivian stood at the kitchen sink staring at the small pool of water forming beneath the cabinet. The faucet had been dripping for days, but now it was worse, trickling into the joints, threatening to damage the cabinetry. She sighed, kneeling to open the undersink panel, only to be greeted by a damp, warped shelf and a distinct moldy smell. She had a building manager, of course, a maintenance hotline, a staff ready to fix problems with one call. But for some reason, the first person who came to mind wasn't any of them. It was Daniel. She reached for her phone before she could talk herself out of it. Daniel had just returned from school drop-off and was halfway through tightening the brake line on a client's truck when his phone buzzed. He read the message twice. "This is Vivian. My sink is leaking." I wasn't sure who else to call. He wiped his hands on his jeans, a ghost of a smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. There were at least 5 licensed plumbers in his contact list. She could have called any of them. But she called him. "I'll be there in 30. Vivian greeted him in leggings and a simple t-shirt, her hair in a loose ponytail, no silk, no makeup, just the version of her most people never got to see. Daniel noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, he crouched immediately beside the sink, flashlight in hand. "Seems like the valve seal's worn out," he said, poking around. "I can fix it, but I'll need to grab a part from my garage." "Do you have time?" she asked. He nodded. "For you?" "Sure." She wasn't sure why that made her chest tighten. So instead of replying, she asked, would Maya like to come too? If she's not at school, she's at school until 3, Daniel said, but she'd be thrilled to see you again. I'd like that, Vivian said softly. She has a kind heart. She gets it from her mom, he said almost too quickly. Vivian didn't press, but something in his voice made her pause. You don't talk about her much, she said gently. Daniel looked up from beneath the sink. Not because I don't want to. Just, people don't usually ask. Vivian sat on a nearby stool, folding her arms. I'm not most people. He gave a quiet laugh. No, you're not, he told her then briefly honestly. About Claire, his late wife. How she'd been diagnosed with ovarian cancer when Maya was just 2. How they'd fought it together until the end. How he'd dropped out of college to care for both of them. How Maya became his reason for waking up every morning. Vivian listened, her eyes never leaving his face. She would have been proud of you, she said when he finished. Daniel blinked, taken aback. Why do you say that? Because you're raising a bright, empathetic little girl on your own, working 3 jobs and still showing up to fix a sink for a woman you barely know. That takes more strength than most people ever learn. He looked away. Some days, I don't feel strong. I just feel tired. Vivian reached for a glass of water, then stopped. She changed her mind and instead walked over and crouched beside him. We're all tired, she whispered. But people like you remind people like me why we keep going. Daniel returned an hour later with the part and tools, and within 15 minutes the leak was fixed. Vivian brought him lemonade and a small bowl of strawberries while he packed up. For a moment, they didn't say anything, just enjoyed the quiet, the ease. I haven't let someone into my space like this in a long time, she admitted. Usually, I don't want to owe anyone anything. Daniel looked up. You don't owe me a thing. Vivian smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. That's why it means something. Later that afternoon, when Maya arrived after school, she bolted through the door with the enthusiasm of someone visiting her favorite playground. Hi, Miss Vivian. Dad says your sink tried to explode. Vivian laughed. It put up a good fight, but your dad won. Maya looked at her dad with mock pride. See, told you you're a superhero. As Vivian prepared tea and Maya colored at the counter, Daniel wandered the edge of the living room, noting the expensive but impersonal decor, evidence of wealth, success, and emptiness. A beautiful space, but a lonely one. Ever think of redecorating? He asked. Vivian raised an eyebrow. What you think this place screams emotional detachment, only slightly. She smirked. I used to love color. But when Martin left, I got rid of everything he liked. Then maybe it's time to put something new up, Daniel said, nodding toward Maya's colorful drawing on the table. Vivian looked at the scribbled sketch, a version of her Daniel and Maya holding hands under a tree. The proportions were ridiculous, and the hearts floated above all 3 of them. She surprised herself by tearing a piece of tape from a drawer and pinning it to the fridge. There, she said. First new piece. Daniel smiled. Maya cheered. As they packed up to leave, Vivian stood by the door, fingers trailing the handle. Thank you for today, she said quietly. Just doing what any plumber, single dad, part-time superhero would do. Vivian hesitated, then stepped forward and kissed his cheek. It was quick, barely more than a brush. But Daniel froze for half a second, not because he was shocked, but because he wanted irrationally for her not to step back. Vivian cleared her throat. For the sink, she said, covering the moment with a teasing smile. He returned it, grateful, uncertain, something blooming quietly behind his eyes. Any time, he said, voice low. As the door clicked shut behind them, Vivian exhaled, then looked at the drawing on the fridge. The hearts were still floating, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Vivian had always been decisive. She built her company from scratch, negotiated with boardrooms full of men who didn't think she belonged, and walked out of a marriage that was slowly poisoning her sense of self. She had made 100 hard choices and stood by each one. But today she was paralyzed by a simple email draft. Subject line, Re Daniel Brooks. Nomination for Skills Restoration Scholarship. It sat open on her laptop. The body of the email was done, polished, persuasive. Attached were scanned documents she'd gathered herself, his old college transcripts, the GED certificate he quietly earned while working nights, the note from Maya's teacher praising his involvement in her education. Everything needed to nominate him for the city's Community Rehabilitation Scholarship Program, a rare opportunity for adult learners who had abandoned their education due to hardship. All it needed was one click send. But her finger hovered, and never landed. She leaned back in her chair, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. From her seat, she could see the kitchen. The new magnet Maya had given her, a turtle with glittered eyes, was now stuck to the fridge beside the child's drawing of the three of them. Vivian stared at it as if it held an answer. Daniel, meanwhile, had returned to the rhythm of his work, the clatter of wrenches, the greasy smell of metal and oil, the comfort of being useful in a world that often felt beyond repair. Still, his thoughts drifted. Vivian had texted that morning, thanking him again for the sink fix. Short, friendly, no invitation. It shouldn't have bothered him, but it did. Not because he expected anything, but because something in her kiss on the cheek had lingered longer than it should have. He glanced at his phone again. Nothing new. He hated how much he noticed. Later that day, Vivian sat across from her mother, Judy Langley, at a quiet cafe in the Upper West Side. It had been a while since they had lunch, mostly because they both dreaded these meetings. Judy wore her signature navy blazer and sipped her black coffee like it was a business transaction. "How's the board handling the supply chain issue?" she asked, cutting into her salad. Vivian stared at her for a moment. "I didn't invite you here to talk about the company." Judy didn't look up. "You never do, but it always circles back." Vivian forced a smile. "I met someone." That made Judy pause, her fork frozen midair. "Someone meaningful?" she asked slowly. "I don't know yet," Vivian said honestly, "but he's kind and honest, and he makes me feel like I can exhale for the first time in years." Judy's eyes narrowed. "Does he come from our world?" Vivian almost laughed. "No, he delivers groceries, fixes broken sinks, raises a daughter alone. And that's appealing." Vivian leaned forward. "It's real, Mom." Judy sat back, expression unreadable. "I just want you to be careful. You've been through enough. You don't need to add disappointment to the list." "I'm not afraid of being disappointed," Vivian said softly. "I'm afraid of being untouched by something good just because I'm too used to being guarded." For once, her mother didn't have a sharp reply. Just silence. That night, Vivian sat at the dining table laptop, glowing in the dim light. The email draft was still open, still waiting. She thought of Daniel's hands, steady, capable, calloused from years of work. She thought of the way he looked at Maya like she was his entire world. She thought of how he never once spoke of his own sacrifices unless asked, and never with bitterness. What would happen if she submitted this without telling him? Would he be grateful? Hurt, angry? Was it even her place? Vivian closed the laptop without sending. Note. The next day, Daniel picked Maya up from school and was greeted with a sticky note from the front desk. "Your daughter helped clean up after a classroom project today. She showed leadership and kindness. Thank you for raising a wonderful child, Ms. Landers." Daniel smiled, folded the note carefully, and tucked it into his wallet. It felt like a small win in a week of small wonders and even smaller certainties. On the walk home, Maya said, "Are we going to see Miss Vivian this weekend?" "I don't know," Daniel replied. "Why not?" "She might be busy." Maya looked up at him with a kind of knowing that only children possess. "She's not too busy for people she likes." Daniel chuckled. "You've got an answer for everything, huh?" "Nope," she said cheerfully. "Just for you." That evening, Daniel found himself staring at his bookshelf, the one he built himself after Claire passed, when silence filled the house too tightly. On the middle shelf was a textbook he hadn't opened in years, Structural Engineering and Design. A ghost from a life he once thought was his future. He opened it, flipped through the pages, then closed it again and put it in his backpack. Vivian stood in her living room holding a small package in her hand. She had sent it to be printed that morning, Maya's drawing framed and matted professionally with the words, "Right people, right time," inscribed in silver at the bottom. She set it gently on the entryway table. A knock came at the door. She opened it. Daniel stood there, raindrops clinging to his jacket, Maya beside him holding a paper bag. "We brought cookies," he said a little sheepishly, and maybe a reason to smile. Vivian stepped aside, heart suddenly louder than it should have been. Inside, Maya bounded to the kitchen already at home. Daniel stayed by the door. Vivian met his eyes. "There's something I almost did," she confessed. "Something that could have changed everything for you. I didn't send it, because I wasn't sure if it was my place." Daniel tilted his head. Send what she looked away for a moment, then back. "A scholarship application. For adults who never finished school. You qualified. I had all the documents." He was silent. "I didn't send it," she said again, "because I realized I didn't want to do it for you. I wanted to do it with you." Daniel's jaw tensed slightly, then softened. "You have no idea," he said, voice low, "how much that means." She stepped forward. "I don't want to help you because you need saving," she whispered. "I want to help because you deserve to be seen." He didn't answer with words. He just pulled her gently into an embrace. Not rushed, not romantic, just solid, real, enough, and maybe just maybe the beginning of everything. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and warm wax. Vivian had never lit candles in her home before, not really. Not the way people did to relax or create ambience. Her candles were always decorative, never touched, still wrapped in designer labels as if they might melt the image she so carefully built. But tonight the candles were Maya's idea. "I made them myself," the little girl said, proudly, holding up 3 stubby, uneven creations. "One smells like cookies, one like oranges, and this one. I tried to make it smell like hugs." Vivian laughed softly, crouching beside her. "What do hugs smell like?" Maya thought hard, like when you haven't seen someone in a long time and you don't want to let go. Vivian blinked, caught off guard. She stared at the lopsided candle, suddenly unsure if she was holding wax or something more fragile. "That one's my favorite," she whispered. Daniel sat at the kitchen island watching them. His hands rested on a mug of tea, but he wasn't drinking. Just taking it in Vivian barefoot in the soft glow, Maya bubbling with excitement, the air thick with something unspoken but comforting. Something like peace. Vivian joined him with a small smile. "She's decided your place needs more color. Apparently she's planning to art attack your living room." Daniel chuckled. "It could use a makeover. She says your curtains are emotionally tired." "That feels accurate." They laughed together, the kind that lingers in the air long after it's faded. Then, more quietly, Vivian said, "I framed her drawing." Daniel glanced toward the hallway where the entry table sat. "I saw it. I wasn't going to," she admitted. "I thought it might feel childish, or maybe too intimate." "It's perfect," he said. "She put us in the same picture for a reason." Vivian looked down. "Do you think it's too soon for her to think of us like that?" Daniel paused. "No. I think it's just soon enough for us to ask what we think of it." Later that evening, Maya curled up on the couch with a bowl of popcorn watching an old animated movie she insisted was a classic. Daniel and Vivian sat nearby, their conversation quieter, deeper. Vivian swirled her wine. "You ever think about finishing your degree?" Daniel nodded. "More than I admit. It was mechanical engineering. I loved it, building things, fixing problems. But after Claire, everything just froze. My whole future stopped at the edge of her hospital bed." Vivian said nothing for a moment. Then, "And what about now?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Now, it's thawing, bit by bit." Vivian looked at him for a long time. "You deserve to have your future back." "I'm trying," he said softly. "I'm just not sure I know how anymore." She touched his hand fingers, light but steady. "Then let's figure it out. Together." When Maya finally fell asleep, sprawled across the couch in a nest of pillows, Daniel carried her to Vivian's guest room, something that had slowly, without anyone officially deciding, become her room. Vivian watched from the doorway as he pulled a blanket over her and brushed a strand of hair from her face. It was the most beautiful thing she'd seen all week, maybe all year. When he stepped out, she handed him a candle, the hug-scented one. "For your place," she said, "so it doesn't feel so emotionally tired." He laughed softly, then sobered. "You're changing me." "No," she replied. "You're becoming who you were always meant to be. I'm just here to remind you." The next morning, the scent of waffles drifted from the kitchen. Daniel had taken over breakfast duty, and Maya was setting the table like a tiny general arranging silverware with great importance. Vivian poured orange juice into crystal glasses, watching them. "I haven't had mornings like this since I was a kid," she said aloud, not meaning to. Daniel looked up. "Good ones," Vivian shrugged. "Rare. My mom was strict. Controlled every minute. Breakfast was just fuel for achievement. You ever wish she'd been different every day? Until I stopped wishing. Then I just matched her. Cold. Untouchable." Daniel wiped his hands on a towel and came to stand beside her. "You're not cold now." She met his gaze. "That's because of you. And her." Maya interrupted with a loud, "Okay, sit. The waffles will get shy if we don't eat them." They all laughed, and for the first time, Vivian didn't feel like she was watching someone else's family scene from a distance. She was part of it. That afternoon, Vivian took a walk by herself, just a few blocks around Central Park. The air was crisp, the trees trembling with early spring. She hadn't walked without a destination in years. As she passed a bench, she noticed a man reading a book, The Power of Now. He looked up, nodded politely. Vivian paused. Years ago, Martin had given her that exact book, said she needed to live in the moment more, then proceeded to schedule their entire life into color-coded Outlook calendars. Back then, she thought presence meant planning. Now she knew it meant attention, being seen, being felt. And that's what Daniel gave her. Not promises, not future fantasies, just a steady hand on broken things and a quiet place to rest her grief. That night, she returned to the apartment and found something on her doorstep. A single sheet of paper and an envelope with Daniel's handwriting on the front. She opened it. It was his scholarship application. Signed, completed, with a note at the bottom. "Because someone believed in me, before I remembered how to believe in myself." Daniel Vivian pressed the letter to her chest, not to hold it, but to keep it close to the place where she could feel it most. And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of wax and memory, she let the tears come. Not tears of pain, but release. Because the cracks inside her weren't breaking her anymore. They were making space for light. It began with a ping. Vivian's phone vibrated just after 7:30 a.m., while she was still in bed, wrapped in the lingering warmth of sleep and a memory of Daniel's smile the night before. She reached for it lazily, expecting another early email from her CFO or a reminder about an upcoming board call. Instead, it was a text from her assistant. "Vivian, please call me. Right away. There's a story out this morning. Page 6. I'm so sorry." Her heart jolted. She sat up already, opening her browser. She didn't need to guess which story. She only needed to see the headline, "Heiress of Langley Organics Caught, Cuddling the Help Mystery Man, is a grocery delivery driver and widowed single dad." The article was brutal in its smug, insinuating tone. Photos, clearly taken from a distance, likely by someone in the building, showed her standing at the door with Daniel and Maya. Another showed Daniel's hand resting lightly on Vivian's back as they walked out of the building, Maya skipping ahead. And then the caption that made her stomach twist, "From gourmet teas to blue-collar romance, has Vivian Langley finally traded hedge funds for heartstrings?" Vivian stared at the screen, pulse hammering. She didn't care about the gossip. She didn't care about the tone. She cared that Daniel would see this, and Maya, and that they didn't ask for any of it. Daniel was in the middle of frying eggs when his phone buzzed. He wiped his hand on a towel and checked it. First message was from Nate Dude. "You're famous. Page 6. Not in a good way." Next message, Vivian. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't plan any of it. Please let me explain." He clicked the link, read the headline, saw his name, Daniel Brooks, written in cold font beneath an image of his daughter laughing and blurred but unmistakably hers. His hands clenched. He turned off the stove. The eggs hissed and died in the pan. Vivian paced her living room as the sun rose, flooding her penthouse with light she didn't feel she deserved. Every part of her professional brain wanted to spring into action: PR statements, legal counsel, damage control. But none of that mattered right now. There was only one thing that did. She called him. The phone rang twice, then straight to voicemail. Daniel sat in his truck outside the school, Maya in the back seat, humming softly, blissfully unaware. He hadn't told her. He didn't want her to know. Not yet. She was wearing her favorite red jacket, clutching a small paper flower she'd made for Vivian. "Can we go see her today?" she asked sweetly. "I made this just for her." Daniel's throat tightened. "I don't know, honey," he said gently. "Miss Vivian's probably busy today." "But she always makes time," Maya argued. He didn't reply. Just watched the morning sun ripple through the windshield like a promise it couldn't keep. Back in the penthouse, Vivian stood by the window phone, still in her hand, unread messages stacking behind it like ghosts. The first came from her mother. "This is exactly why I told you to be careful." She didn't reply. The next, from a board member. "We'll need a statement, Vivian. Investors are already talking." Still, she said nothing. Instead, she opened her laptop, typed 2 words, "Daniel Brooks," then stared, as if the words themselves were enough to pull him back. That evening, Daniel finally responded. Just one line. "I don't want to be a headline in your story." Vivian reread the message 3 times, then sat down on the couch alone and cried. Not because it was unfair, but because it was true. The next few days passed like shadows for both of them. Vivian gave perfunctory interviews, denied comment, declined to feed the story. Her PR team scrambled to scrub images, threaten lawsuits. But the internet had a memory, and what it remembered was how fast beauty could be twisted into spectacle. She didn't fight it, she just stopped smiling. Daniel avoided the building, avoided the neighborhood. His garage hours became longer. His phone stayed silent. Maya noticed. "You didn't smile today," she said over cereal. "Is it because of Miss Vivian?" Daniel hesitated. "She's not a bad person," he said. "She just lives in a world where people like us get used." "But she didn't use us," Maya replied earnestly. "She framed my drawing. She eats burnt cookies and likes hugs." Daniel nearly laughed. "Nearly?" "She made you happy," Maya said softly. And that somehow hurt more than anything else. Vivian finally worked up the nerve to visit the garage. She didn't text first. She knew he wouldn't answer. She just showed up wearing jeans, her hair pulled back, no cameras, no entourage. Nate recognized her from the tabloids and raised a skeptical brow. Daniel stepped out from the repair bay and froze. Vivian held out a small paper flower. "Maya made this for me. I didn't come for drama or closure." Daniel said nothing. "I came because I miss you," she said. "And I'm sorry I didn't protect you from something I should have seen coming." He looked down at the flower, then back at her. "She still talks about you every night." "I talk about her too," Vivian whispered. "And me?" he asked, voice low. She met his gaze without flinching. "Every morning." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Daniel stepped back. Not far, but enough. "I need time," he said. Vivian nodded. "I'll wait. For you. For whatever part of your world I'm allowed to stand in." She placed the paper flower on his toolbox, then left without another word. That night, Daniel tucked Maya into bed. She clutched her turtle nightlight and whispered, "Did she like my flower?" He nodded. Will we see her again? He hesitated, then kissed her forehead. I think. Love has a way of finding its way back. He didn't know if he believed it fully, but as he turned out the light and closed the door, he realized something important. Even if the world saw him as a headline, Vivian never had. And maybe that was a beginning worth returning to. The silence was not new to Daniel. He had lived in silence after Claire died, long hollow days where the world moved around him, but he stayed still, anchored by grief and responsibility. He knew how to fill that quiet with tasks, with hard work, with Maya's laughter. He had learned to survive it. But this silence, the one that came after Vivian, this one felt different. It wasn't emptiness. It was absence. It had a shape, a texture, a memory. It wore the scent of chamomile and wax. It whispered through the corners of the house like someone had just left the room but hadn't said goodbye. Vivian felt it too. She sat in her office pretending to read reports, nodding at numbers that no longer spoke to her. The board had calmed, the gossip had moved on. The PR crisis averted, but inside she was far from recovered. For the first time in her adult life, she had no desire to fix the narrative. Because she didn't want a new one. She wanted him, and Maya, and that fragile, beautiful, almost they had been building before it all unraveled. She scrolled through her camera roll, found a photo she didn't remember taking Maya in the kitchen, grinning up at her father as he flipped pancakes. Vivian's hand was in the corner of the frame, reaching for a plate. She hadn't realized until now that all three of them were there, all in motion, all belonging. Judy Langley arrived unannounced. Vivian opened the door to her mother's usual cool elegance, a beige trench coat, silk scarf, perfectly pressed slacks. I read your quote in Forbes, Judy said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Dignified, polished. I was proud. Vivian folded her arms. That's a first. I'm capable of giving credit where it's due, Judy replied, setting her bag down. Even if it's rare. Vivian didn't respond. Judy glanced around the apartment. Her gaze paused on the framed drawing still proudly displayed near the entry table. Still clinging to crayons, she asked. Vivian's jaw clenched. Maya drew that. I assumed. Judy turned back to her. You know, Vivian, this kind of distraction, it's charming. But it doesn't last. Men like him, they fall apart when the pressure comes. Vivian stared at her mother, pulse rising. Men like him hold people together while everything else falls apart. You just never noticed. You're emotional, Judy said, brushing imaginary lint from her sleeve. Vivian stepped closer, her voice steady but sharp. No, I'm awake. And for the first time in years, I know what it feels like to be seen, not evaluated. Judy blinked, taken aback. Vivian exhaled slowly. I don't need your approval, Mom. I never did. But I won't let you dismiss someone who's more genuine than anyone I've ever known. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Judy nodded once carefully. If you believe in him that much, perhaps I should reconsider. Vivian didn't smile, but she felt something settle inside her. Daniel sat at the garage, but his heart wasn't in it. He stared at the scholarship application on his dashboard, now fully approved, waiting for submission. The deadline was next week. He couldn't decide whether sending it would mean moving forward or moving on. Maya had been quiet too, less bubbly, more thoughtful. She knew something was wrong. He found her later in the evening sitting cross-legged on the couch, coloring silently. What are you drawing? He asked. She looked up. A bridge. Daniel smiled faintly. Nice. Where does it go? To her, Maya said. But it's broken in the middle. Daniel's breath caught. Why is it broken? She didn't answer, just kept coloring. He sat beside her. Want help fixing it? She nodded, and together they began drawing the beams that would make it whole again. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch with a blanket over his shoulders, watching headlights drift along the quiet street. The city was quieter here, softer, safer. But his heart wasn't still. He pulled out his phone. scrolled to a name he hadn't called in days. His thumb hovered over the call button. He didn't press it. Vivian sat at her piano. It was the first time she'd opened it in months. She used to play when she needed to feel something before life taught her to mute her own longing. She touched the keys softly, then began to play. It was clumsy at first, halting, but the melody took shape like a memory reintroduced to her hands. She didn't realize she was crying until a teardrop struck the ivory. The next morning, Maya placed a sealed envelope on the kitchen table. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" She beamed. "I mailed it." He opened it. Inside was a copy of the scholarship application stamped and addressed. "I used Mrs. Thompson's printer at school," Maya said proudly. "I told her it was for something important." Daniel looked at her speechless. "You want to be an engineer, right?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Then we build things, even when it's scary." His throat tightened. He reached out and hugged her close. "You are the bravest person I know." Vivian opened her door to a package that afternoon. It was wrapped in brown paper, no return label. Inside, she found a single object, a child's drawing. A bridge mended bright, stretching across a river. On one side was a woman in a blue dress. On the other, a man and a little girl. The figures were walking toward each other. The caption in Maya's handwriting read, "We're better when we meet in the middle." Vivian sat down, slowly pressing the drawing to her heart. She didn't need more words. She only needed one step forward. Just like Daniel. Sometimes love doesn't disappear. It waits, in the pauses, in the silence. And sometimes, silence hurts because it's full of things we're not yet brave enough to say. But when the silence breaks, it becomes music. The letter began simply. Dear Daniel. Vivian stared at the blinking cursor fingers hovering over the keyboard. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic 19 floors below. She'd poured herself a glass of wine, but it sat untouched beside her. She reread the line she'd written, then deleted it. She'd already started and erased this letter 6 times in the past 2 days. None of the drafts sounded right. They were either too formal, too emotional, too safe, or too raw. She wasn't even sure if she wanted to send it. But still, she kept writing. Daniel stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window at the backyard, watching Maya pick dandelions. She was humming to herself, completely content in her small world of flowers and sun. She hadn't asked about Vivian today. It was the first day she hadn't, and somehow that hurt more than when she did. Daniel reached into the cabinet above the fridge and pulled down the old envelope, Vivian's scholarship nomination documents, which he still hadn't returned to her. He'd already submitted the real version Maya had mailed. The acceptance confirmation had arrived 2 days ago. The program started in 4 weeks. It should have been a triumph, but it felt hollow without her knowing. He set the envelope down and returned to the sink, washing dishes in silence. That night, Vivian lit a candle. Just one, Maya's hug-scented one. It had burned unevenly over the past few weeks, wax pooled on one side, the flame dancing with quiet stubbornness. She sat at the piano but didn't play. Instead, she reached for her notebook. And this time she didn't write on her laptop. She wrote by hand. Daniel, I miss the way your voice softens when you talk about your daughter. I miss the sound of her laugh filling this apartment like music I didn't know I needed. I miss the quiet, the comfort, the way you never made me feel like I had to perform to be enough. I miss the version of me that existed when you were around because I liked her more than I've ever liked the one I built for the world. She paused, then continued. I was scared. Not of you, but of how much I needed something real, and how much I didn't believe I deserved it. You changed that. Even in silence, you've stayed with me. I'm not asking for everything, just one more beginning. Love, Vivian. She stared at the letter for a long time, folded it carefully and slipped it into an envelope. Then, she left it on the piano. Unsent. At school the next day, Maya sat in art class working on a new project. A message that matters. The instructions were to write something meaningful to someone you care about. Most kids wrote to parents' siblings' pets. Maya drew 3 figures, again. But this time they were standing in a garden. There were words above their heads written in crayon. Sometimes love forgets how to speak, but it remembers how to come home. She folded it and put it in her backpack. That afternoon, Vivian's doorman buzzed. "A young girl just dropped something off for you, Miss Langley." Vivian stepped into the lobby to find an envelope with her name written in looping handwriting. Inside was Maya's drawing, and a note on the back in careful block letters. "My dad still has the turtle picture in his car. He said he doesn't know what to say, but he listens to sad music when I'm not talking. I think you both miss each other. You don't need to say big words. Just come home." Vivian's hands trembled slightly. She whispered, "Oh, Maya, you're wiser than all of us." Daniel found himself standing at the library entrance of the community college that evening, holding his acceptance packet like it might disappear. He had driven there without meaning to. Just wanted to see it, just to make it real. But nothing felt real without her knowing. He sat on a bench nearby, pulled out a notebook from his backpack, and opened it to a fresh page. "Vivian, Maya, misses you. She talks about your candles and your tea and how your kitchen doesn't smell like grease. She says you feel like family. I think she's right. I didn't respond to your messages because I didn't know how to be angry at someone I wanted to hold. But I don't want silence to win between us. I want to build something. With you. If you still want to." He signed it, folded it, then left it in the notebook. Unsent. Vivian stood at her window the next morning, holding a coffee she didn't drink, watching the clouds drift over the skyline. Her phone buzzed. Another message from a friend asking if she was going to the gala next week. She hadn't RSVP'd yet, because the person she wanted most to stand beside her wouldn't be there, unless she asked, unless she reached. She opened her drawer, pulled out the letter she had written, then with a steady hand slid it into an envelope. This time she sealed it. She walked down the street to the post office, the wind tangling her hair, her heels clicking on the pavement. She didn't hesitate. She dropped it in the box. Let it go. Let it find its way. Across the city, Daniel stood in his garage wiping grease off his hands when his phone buzzed. A notification from an unknown number. One new delivery scheduled for Vivian Langley. He stared, then opened the app. At the bottom of the screen, a single instruction. "No package. Just you." His heart jolted. He stepped out from the garage and looked up at the sky. The clouds were parting, and something inside him whispered, maybe this is how love finds its way home. Not in grand gestures, but in letters unsent. Finally delivered. Vivian Langley had attended more galas than she could count. They all blurred together, chilled champagne-tight smiles, strategic small talk, and heels that pinched by hour 2. But this one felt different, because this one mattered. The Hearts and Hands Gala was her foundation's first major event since the media firestorm weeks prior. It was meant to be a quiet but meaningful return to charity, to public visibility, to purpose. And more than anything, it was an offering, not to investors. To him. Vivian adjusted her reflection in the mirror. The dress was simple, elegant, but soft. Sapphire blue, modest neckline, long sleeves. Her hair was tucked behind one ear, and around her neck she wore a delicate silver chain. Not for glamour, for courage. She turned toward the small card on her dresser, the one she'd written and rewritten 5 times before finally sending it through the delivery app she knew Daniel still used. "There's no package, just me. I'll be at the Hearts and Hands Gala. You said you didn't want to be a headline in my story, but what if we wrote one together?" It was bold, but Vivian wasn't interested in hiding anymore. Across town, Daniel held the card in his hand like it might disappear if he blinked. Maya peeked up from her homework on the kitchen table, watching him read it again. "Is that from Miss Vivian?" He nodded slowly. "She invited me to the gala." Maya's face lit up. "Are you going? I don't know." "You should," she said plainly. "You look better when you're near her." Daniel chuckled. "I don't even own a suit." Maya jumped up, ran to her closet, and came back with her pink piggy bank clutched to her chest. "I have $11.32, she announced solemnly. "You can borrow it. For something nice." Daniel stared at her, heart cracking wide. "Maya," he whispered, pulling her close, "you are the greatest gift of my life." She squeezed him tight. "Then go tell her that." The night of the gala shimmered with soft light and quiet elegance. Held in the conservatory wing of the City Museum, the venue was wrapped in glass and green, the scent of orchids drifting on the air. Vivian greeted donors, shook hands, posed for photos with the new scholarship recipients, each one a single parent re-entering school, rebuilding life. But her eyes kept drifting to the entrance. Waiting. Hoping. Daniel stood outside the building in a charcoal gray suit, borrowed from Nate, altered by a friend of the garage's receptionist. His shoes didn't quite match, but Maya had insisted on polishing them so they shone. He held nothing in his hands, only a decision in his chest. He walked through the doors. The crowd shimmered like a tide of polished faces, but he only saw one. Vivian turned at the same moment he spotted her, and everything else disappeared. She stepped forward, unsure whether to smile or cry. He beat her to it with a small, steady grin that spoke volumes. "You came," she breathed. "You invited me," he replied. Vivian reached out, hesitated, then let her hand fall to her side. Daniel took it, gently held it. "I'm not here for a scene," he said, "or to be saved, or to be thanked. I know. I'm here because I read your letter 5 times. Then I read it with Maya, and we both agreed. If love remembers how to come home, it deserves a door to walk through." Vivian's breath hitched. "Then walk through mine," she said. As the music swelled and the first speaker was introduced, Vivian and Daniel took their seats at a quiet table near the stage. The room faded into velvet shadow, all eyes turned forward. Then Vivian stood. She hadn't planned to speak, but something in her couldn't stay silent. She took the mic, scanning the audience, then settling on Daniel. "There's something I've learned these past months," she began, voice steady but soft. "It's that strength isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. It's about honesty. It's about building again when everything inside you feels too tired to try." She paused. "I want to tell you about a man who knocked on the wrong door one night. A man who didn't offer promises or flattery or wealth, but offered something far more valuable. Time, kindness, presence." She smiled. "That man reminded me who I was beneath the headlines, beneath the pressure. He saw me, not the brand, not the name, just me." A hush fell across the room. Vivian's voice grew more certain. "So tonight this gala isn't about charity. It's about second chances, and the extraordinary beauty of ordinary people doing the bravest thing of all, believing in one another." Applause swelled. Vivian stepped down. Daniel stood as she reached him, and in front of 100 polished guests he kissed her cheek, quiet, reverent, true. After the event, they stood on the museum steps beneath the soft light of spring lanterns. "Do you remember what Maya said the first night she met you?" Daniel asked. Vivian smiled. "She asked if I was sick." Daniel laughed. "No, after that." Vivian's smile softened. She said, "I seemed lonely." "She was right," he murmured. "And so was I." Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder. "What did you say? That no one should be alone on a night like that?" She looked up at him. "And tonight," he took her hand, "tonight I'm just glad I finally found the right door." They didn't need a dramatic ending, just one more beginning. Together. The morning after the gala dawned quietly. Daniel stirred awake to the soft ticking of the rain against his apartment window. Maya was still asleep in the next room, curled up in the cocoon of her blankets, her stuffed dog clutched under one arm. For a long moment he lay still, letting the memory of the previous night wash over him like a tide. Vivian's voice at the podium, her eyes scanning the room and landing only on him. The way her hand trembled slightly when she reached for his, and how steady it became when their fingers interlaced. And her words walk through mine. They echoed now not as a question but as an invitation that still hung in the air, waiting. Later that morning, Daniel took Maya to a small cafe 2 blocks from their apartment. They sat across from each other, Maya swinging her legs while she smeared strawberry jam on toast. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. So, she said mid-bite, "Are you going to marry Miss Vivian?" Daniel nearly choked on his sip. "That's quite a leap." He coughed. "She likes you," Maya said confidently. "And you like her. That's how it starts." He smiled despite himself. "It's more complicated than that, kiddo." Maya shrugged. "You always say grown-ups make things harder than they have to be." He laughed, then really laughed and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Maybe you're right." She looked at him, suddenly serious. "You're happier when you're with her. I think she's been lonely for a long time, too." Daniel studied his daughter, amazed again at her quiet wisdom. And then, as if sensing his hesitance, Maya leaned forward and whispered, "You can't fix the whole world, Daddy, but maybe, just maybe, you can help fix hers." That afternoon, Daniel found himself outside Vivian's townhouse. He hadn't texted, hadn't called. He just stood there holding a small bouquet of daisies, Vivian's favorite, according to Maya, who had appointed herself emotional consultant for this mission. He raised his hand to knock, but the door opened before he could. Vivian stood there barefoot, her hair in a loose braid, wearing a faded Georgetown sweatshirt and soft jeans. For the first time, she looked completely at ease. "I was just about to make tea," she said. "You like lemon, right?" He held out the flowers instead of answering. She smiled and stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled like cinnamon and cedar. Daniel took in the subtle changes, more photos of her family on the shelves, a framed crayon drawing, clearly done by Maya, on the fridge, the faint echo of laughter in a space that once felt like marble, and silence. They sat on the couch, 2 mugs between them, steam rising slowly. For a while, neither spoke. Until finally Daniel said softly, "Last night felt like the first page of something." Vivian's gaze didn't waver. "I hope it was." He looked down into his tea. "I've never done this before. Not like this. Not when it feels like I'm holding something that matters more than I can explain." Vivian set her cup down. "I've spent so many years trying to be strong. For the company. For the public. For everyone but myself." She hesitated. "And then one night you showed up at my door completely by accident and somehow you saw past everything." Daniel reached for her hand. "I saw you. That was never an accident." Tears welled up but didn't fall. Not yet. They talked for hours about childhood dreams, regrets, the invisible weights they both carried. About Maya's quiet strength. About Vivian's father, whose absence shaped her as much as his presence ever had. About why it's so hard to believe we're worthy of love when life has taught us to expect the door to slam instead. And finally, when the sun had dipped low behind the skyline, Vivian turned to him and asked Daniel, "What does home mean to you?" He looked at her, the question wrapping around something deep in his chest. "It's not a place," he said. "Not anymore. It's a person. It's the moment someone looks at you and doesn't ask you to change or fix anything or prove you belong. They just open the door." Vivian inhaled sharply. "And I want that to be you," he added. She didn't reply with words. She leaned forward and kissed him gently, no grandeur, no urgency. Just a quiet promise wrapped in warmth and belonging. That evening, Vivian cooked. Nothing fancy grilled cheese and tomato soup, but Daniel swore it was the best thing he'd eaten in weeks. Maya arrived later carrying her overnight backpack and ran straight to Vivian, who greeted her with a warm hug and a whispered, "I missed you." Maya looked up at the two of them. "So, is this like our new Saturday thing now?" Vivian laughed. "If you'll have me." Maya beamed. That night, after Daniel tucked Maya into the guest room, he walked back downstairs to find Vivian on the couch, a blanket over her legs, flipping through an old photo album. He sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. There on the page was a picture of Vivian as a little girl missing front teeth, hugging a dog, freckles across her nose. I used to think I had to become someone else to be loved, she whispered. Smarter, tougher, more polished. But maybe I just needed to become myself again. Daniel gently closed the album. You are more than enough, Vivian. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, no gala, no headlines, no storm, something extraordinary settled between them, a sense of peace, of belonging, of home. Autumn had crept into the city on tiptoes, dressing the trees in amber and gold and dusting the sidewalks with the crunch of change. The morning light filtered softly through the windows of Vivian's townhouse, bathing the space in warmth and the quiet hum of something new, something tender and real. Daniel stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, humming an old folk tune as he packed Maya's school lunch. He had learned to cut the crusts just the way she liked, and Vivian teased him mercilessly about the dinosaur-shaped sandwiches. But secretly, she loved it. Loved the way he did the small things with care. Vivian, barefoot and still in her robe, padded into the room with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to Daniel, their fingers brushing a spark as familiar now as the beat of a second heart in the room. Big day, she said, sipping. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You mean the investor meeting the press interview, or the fact that Maya is officially making us attend Family Culture Day in full costume? She smirked. I meant the third one. Obviously. They laughed, the kind of easy shared laughter that comes not from jokes but from trust, built slowly, delicately across months of showing up, apologizing, forgiving, and staying. At school, Maya tugged Daniel's hand toward the gymnasium where rows of families were already setting up food and displays. Vivian followed behind with a tray of banh mi sandwiches, a nod to Daniel's Vietnamese heritage, a recipe they had perfected together after several attempts and flour-covered disasters in the kitchen. On their table stood a photo of Maya's mother, Daniel's late wife, smiling beside a young Daniel and a tiny newborn wrapped in pink. Vivian saw it and placed a small vase of daisies next to the frame. She's part of this too, she said softly. Daniel looked at her, his heart tugging. She would have liked you, he whispered. Vivian touched his hand. I hope so. That evening, after the school event and the awkward group dancing that Maya insisted upon, the 3 of them walked home together, hands full of leftover food and paper crafts. They paused outside the brownstone. Vivian glanced at Daniel. Do you want to come in? She asked. Daniel looked down at Maya, who was grinning up at him like she knew something he didn't. I do, he said. Later that night, after Maya had fallen asleep in Vivian's guest room, her drawing of a new family taped proudly to the fridge, Daniel sat with Vivian on the balcony. The city hummed below them, but up here there was only stillness. Do you ever think about how all this started? She asked, curled beside him under a blanket. He nodded. A door, a wrong address, a silk robe. She laughed. Don't forget the soup Ken I nearly dropped on your foot, and the fact that I almost left. But you didn't. He looked at her deeply, fully. No, I didn't, because something told me that maybe for once in my life I wasn't in the wrong place. I was exactly where I was meant to be. She blinked back tears. It scares me sometimes how easily I could have missed this. Daniel took her hand gently. You didn't. That's what matters. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Vivian asked Daniel, do you think it's really possible that people can start over even after they've lost so much? He turned toward her, heart open, steady. I don't think we ever really start over, he said. I think we carry our past with us, our losses, our grief, our failures. But sometimes someone comes along who says, you don't have to carry it alone. And suddenly, everything becomes lighter. Vivian leaned into him. You made me lighter. He smiled. You brought me home. Weeks later, a small, quiet ceremony was held in Vivian's garden. It wasn't grand. There were no press photographers, no gowns with long trains or scripted speeches. Just close friends, a few neighbors, Maya holding a bouquet too big for her hands, and the sound of wind weaving through the ivy. Daniel stood there in a navy suit, his eyes never leaving Vivian as she walked toward him in a simple cream dress, barefoot on the grass. When they exchanged vows, neither of them promised perfection. Instead, they promised presence, to keep showing up, to hold space for sadness and make room for joy, to walk through each other's doors no matter how heavy they sometimes seemed and say, "I'm here." That night, after the guests had left and Maya had fallen asleep curled between pillows and petals, Daniel and Vivian sat beneath the fairy lights still strung across the fence. "Think we got it right this time?" Vivian asked, head resting on his shoulder. "I don't think it was ever about getting it perfect," Daniel replied. "I think it was about getting it real." She smiled, eyes closing. And in that moment, no misunderstandings, no masks, no need to prove anything. They simply existed. Together. Whole. Not because everything was fixed, but because they had finally found the one thing that made all the broken pieces fit, a heart that answered when the wrong door opened. The rain had started some time before dawn, a thin, persistent drizzle that blanketed the city in gray and seeped through everything: coats, plans, hopes. David Torres pressed the back of his hand to his daughter's forehead again as they sat in the front seat of his aging pickup, parked 2 blocks from the towering glass building of Callahan Frost Financial. Lena stirred beneath her oversized hoodie. Her cheeks flushed, her breathing a soft rasp in the still air. "She's warm," he whispered mostly to himself. "Too warm." He looked at the time on his cracked phone, 7:38 a.m. If he didn't clock in by 7:55, he'd lose the shift. And losing one more shift meant losing everything. His contract with the building's maintenance vendor was already hanging by a thread. No PTO, no sick leave, no union. Just a clipboard, a tool belt, and the mercy of whoever reviewed his weekly hours. David looked at Lena again, her legs curled under her. She opened her eyes slightly. "Daddy, do I have to go to school?" "Not today, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. "We're doing a quiet day." He made a decision. David scooped her into his arms, wrapped her tightly in his faded work jacket, and slipped out of the truck. The cold rain tapped against their shoulders as he jogged across the street, through the underground delivery bay, and into the rear service entrance of the building. Inside, it was warm and sterile, bright lights, white floors, the scent of lemon cleaner, and ambition. He nodded politely to the security guard who barely looked up. He carried Lena past the boiler room, past the janitorial lockers, and into storage room 3B, a forgotten closet behind the electrical panel. "Stay here, baby," he whispered, laying her on a folded moving blanket. He handed her a thermos of warm water and a half banana. "I'll be just outside. I'll check on you every break." Lena nodded sleepily. "I like it when you're close. I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her forehead and stepped out, closing the door gently behind him. By 9:15, David was up on the 19th floor adjusting an elevator panel that had been glitching for days. He worked quickly, silently, just like he always did. Efficient, invisible, disposable. At 9:27, he got the text that would detonate his day. "Torres, come to conference room A, immediately." Leticia Flores, Director of HR. His stomach dropped. Had someone seen him bring Lena in cameras? A complaint? He wiped his hands, smoothed his jacket, and rode the elevator down, each ding echoing like a countdown. When he stepped into the glass-walled conference room, every head turned. Leticia sat at the far end of the polished table spine, ramrod straight eyes already narrowed like a verdict had been passed. "Mr. Torres," she said coolly, "why is your daughter in our building?" David blinked. I didn't have anyone to watch her today," he began, heart thudding. "She's sick. I couldn't leave her home alone." Leticia's voice sliced through his explanation like glass. "This is not a daycare. Our company policy strictly prohibits unauthorized personnel on site, especially children." A few team leads sat along the wall, clearly uncomfortable, but no one spoke. "She's not a danger," David said softly. "She's just resting. I only needed to finish today's shift policy," Leticia said, "is not a suggestion. You are in breach of security protocol. You are terminated effective immediately." The words landed like a slap. David opened his mouth, closed it again. No one looked at him. No one offered a word. Only the hum of the lights and the gentle tap of rain on the glass walls filled the silence. Letitia stood. "You may collect your things. Security will escort you out." David nodded slowly. He turned and walked away, each step echoing louder than the last. As he exited the conference room, a movement caught his eye. A woman, unfamiliar but striking, stood just outside in the hallway, half-shadowed by a marble pillar. She wore a tailored gray coat and held a closed umbrella in one hand. Her expression was unreadable. Her eyes followed him not with judgment but something else, something softer. She didn't say a word. David turned away and walked on. He found Lena where he'd left her, shivering slightly but awake. She looked up as he entered. "Are we going now?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. David crouched beside her, nodding. "Yeah, baby. We're leaving." In the rain, he forced a smile. "Rain's just sky hugs. We'll be fine." He bundled her up again, and together they stepped back into the freight corridor, through the service lobby, past the vending machines and the mechanical buzz of forgotten rooms. They exited through the side door. The rain had turned heavier, fat drops now slicing through the cold. David pulled his coat tighter around Lena, shielding her as best he could. "Mama used to sing when it rained," she mumbled, pressing her cheek against his chest. "I liked that." David blinked hard. "I know, sweetheart," he whispered. "I remember." As they reached the sidewalk, the street hummed with life people under umbrellas, rushing, clicking heels on wet pavement, not one of them slowing. He looked up, jaw clenched. Behind him, far above on the 20th floor, the woman in the gray coat stood at the window watching. Still silent, still unseen. David took a deep breath and turned away. "I'll find us something," he murmured. "I always do." He didn't see the umbrella in her hand tighten. He didn't see her step back from the glass. But she had seen everything. And she would not forget. The rain kept falling. Not in waves or thunderclaps, but in that relentless, whispering way that soaked a man's resolve, the same way it soaked his socks. David walked with Lena pressed against his chest beneath his coat, her damp hair clinging to his collarbone. She was warm, too warm, and still breathing with that wheezing rasp that never failed to make his heart clench. He kept his eyes low, avoiding the gazes of passing umbrellas, of suits and heels and high-speed lives that had no time for a man carrying a child with nowhere to go. They passed a diner. A red neon sign blinked "Open 24/7, flickering like a last-chance heartbeat. David stepped inside, not for food, not yet, but for a moment out of the wet. The hostess gave him a tight smile. She looked at Lena, then back at him. "We're full, sir." Half the booths were empty. David nodded anyway. "Can I just stand here a moment to warm her up? We'll leave right after." She hesitated. 5 minutes, no longer. He whispered a thank you and sat at the edge of a booth, rubbing Lena's back. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed but alert. "I like the smell in here," she said, her voice no louder than a paper scratch. He smiled. "Smells like pancakes and dreams." A soft chuckle escaped her, dry and thin. Then, like a match gone out, her eyes closed again. David turned to the window, staring out at the traffic light blinking red across the misty glass. He didn't notice the woman entering the cafe behind him. She wore a gray wool coat, her umbrella dripping quietly into the holder by the door. She didn't speak, just watched. Waited. When the server came over with a small to-go bag, she pointed discreetly at the pair in the booth. For them, she whispered, "Don't say who." Inside the bag, a grilled cheese sandwich, still warm, a bottle of apple juice, and a note scribbled on a napkin. "For the little fighter. Stay warm today." The server handed it to David awkwardly. "Someone left this at the counter. Must have seen your kid." David blinked, surprised. "Are you sure I'm just the messenger?" He opened the bag. Lena stirred, catching the smell. "Is that cheese?" "Looks like someone sent you magic," David said softly. "How lucky are we? I'm the luckiest." Lena mumbled, reaching for the juice. He watched her sip, her cheeks pinking ever so slightly. His throat tightened. Whoever had done this had seen them, cared, and that was more than most. They kept walking after that. The clouds didn't let up, but neither did David. He carried a manila folder of resumes, wrinkled, water-spotted, and truthfully a little desperate. Each line in it told a story that no one seemed willing to read. Facilities maintenance. 3 years electrical troubleshooting. Certified team lead construction until 2020. But next to it in fine print on every form he filled, have you ever been terminated from a prior role? Yes. And the moment he checked that box, every polite smile turned tight. Every "we'll get back to you" became a silent door closing. They walked to a gas station where he'd seen a hiring sign the week before. The manager took one look at his soggy coat, the sleeping child in his arms, and sighed. "I don't hire people with family baggage," he said plainly. No offense. David didn't respond, just nodded. Understood. Back on the sidewalk, he tried not to let Lena feel the tension in his chest. She'd fallen asleep again, her body limp with exhaustion and fever. He adjusted her weight and pressed his lips to her temple. "We're gonna figure this out," he said. "I don't care how many no's we get." They found temporary refuge in a 24-hour laundromat. The place hummed with the sound of spinning dryers and the low buzz of fluorescent lights. David placed Lena on a bench and tucked his coat over her like a blanket. He sat beside her, head in hands, listening to the rain hit the metal awning outside. Then he heard it footsteps. Soft, deliberate. A woman passed by the window outside. He recognized her, or thought he did. It was hard to tell in the blur of motion and water. She didn't come in, just paused, looking through the glass at Lena at him, and then moved on. He stood up to follow, but hesitated. He couldn't leave Lena alone, and besides, why chase a stranger? He sat back down, and noticed something odd. Next to their bench on the small plastic table sat a box of tissues and a sealed bottle of children's cold medicine. David looked around. No one nearby. No sign of who'd left it. He picked it up. Brand new. Expiration date years ahead. He swallowed hard. An hour later, David found a shelter with a bench under a small overhang just off 3rd Street. He curled Lena into his lap, wrapping them both in what remained of his warmth. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I should have figured this out by now." Lena stirred. Her voice was faint but clear. "I like being with you better than any place, Daddy." Tears blurred his vision. Above them, high in a corner office of a building with no name on the door, the woman from earlier stood with her arms crossed, looking down through rain-streaked glass. She hadn't planned on seeing them again. But now that she had, she couldn't unsee them. And in the girl's wheeze, in the father's stubborn silence. She heard her own past breathing back at her. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind streets slick with yesterday's pain and today's stubborn promise. David sat at the edge of a picnic bench behind a public library, spreading out damp resumes across a plastic sleeve he'd borrowed from the job center bulletin board. He used the last of his napkin stash to blot the corners dry. His eyes scanned the page again. It wasn't glamorous, it didn't pretend, but it was honest. David Torres, skilled technician. Bilingual English, Spanish. Punctual. No record. Father. That last word, father, wasn't on the resume, but it was in everything else. Behind him, Lena slept curled on the bench with her head resting on a folded sweater, still feverish, still wheezing softly. Her hair was matted in the back, her socks mismatched, but her tiny fingers still clutched a crumpled sketch of a house with windows and a chimney and 2 stick figures, one big one, small, both smiling. David looked over his shoulder just to be sure she was still breathing smoothly, then stood. He slipped 4 resumes into his backpack, zipped it shut, and walked 2 blocks to the nearest maintenance subcontractor's office. He rang the buzzer. A man in a ball cap opened the door and peered out. "Looking for work," David said quickly. "Any kind. Cleaning repair overnight. I've got experience license, too." The man took the paper, gave it one glance. "You worked for Rexton Facilities," he asked, already beginning to fold it. 3 years, David said. "Fired last week. I brought my daughter to work. She was sick. No one to watch her." The man paused, frowned. "Yeah, that doesn't look great on a record. HR flags that sort of thing." David nodded. He wasn't surprised anymore. Just tired. The man sighed, handed the resume back. "Try Hartman Janitorial on the East Side. They sometimes take walk-ins. Good luck, man." He returned to the bench. Lena stirred as he sat, her voice a soft croak. "Did we get it?" David smiled gently. "Not this one." She nodded and curled in closer. "It's okay. We'll try the next." That simple trust undid him. He kissed the crown of her head, then reached for her inhaler. Nearly empty. They'd need a refill by tomorrow. He had $18 left. He stared across the parking lot toward the drugstore down the street. Behind it stood a narrow 2-story building with a cracked sign that read, "Solunas Rivera, Cleaning Services." A paper sign was taped crookedly in the window. "Now hiring night staff." No diploma required. David hesitated. He looked at Lena, then back at the sign. He stood. The inside smelled of bleach dust and faint lemon. A narrow desk stood near the door, manned by a young receptionist chewing gum and typing slowly on an ancient keyboard. "Application?" David asked. She reached under the desk, handed him a form. "Bathroom's down the hall if your kid needs it." David blinked. "She's not with me right now." She shrugged. "Most folks bring their kids here. It's fine long as they stay in the break room." Something in him eased. He sat on a plastic chair in the corner and began filling in the form. Name, David Torres Experience. 8 years electrical janitorial facilities. Previous employer, Rexton Facilities. Reason for leaving his pen hovered. He swallowed. Terminated brought child to sight. He filled it in slowly. Truth had its cost. But hiding hadn't done him much good either. He handed it in, thanked the girl, and walked back toward Lena. What he didn't see, behind a partially open office door on the second-floor mezzanine, a woman was watching. Again. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just watched the man walk out into the daylight holding nothing but an empty water bottle and a quiet dignity that wrapped around him like armor. Later that afternoon, as David and Lena sat outside a convenience store sharing a warm bottle of Gatorade, his phone buzzed. He nearly dropped it. "Mr. Torres, this is Elena from Solunas Rivera. Are you available to start tomorrow?" His mouth opened, then closed. "Yes," he said. "Yes, absolutely." "There's something else," Elena continued. "We understand you may have your daughter with you at times. As long as she's in the break room and stays safe, that's allowed. Just keep her out of active work zones." David blinked, stunned. You're serious?" "Yes, sir. We're serious. We've been where you are." He hung up and turned to Lena, who was now sitting cross-legged on the pavement, drawing circles in the dust with a straw. "We got the job," he said. She looked up, blinking. Her face cracked into a grin. "We got it. We got it." He pulled her into his arms, spinning her once carefully. She coughed in surprise, then laughed a high, breathy giggle that shook loose some of the heaviness in his chest. As they sat on the curb sharing the rest of the drink, a man in a gray van across the street pulled away. He was the supply driver for Solunas Rivera and had seen David there earlier. And in a corner office upstairs once again, the woman stood. The same one who had seen them in the rain. The cafe. The laundromat. But this time she wasn't watching with distance. This time she was taking notes. This time she was preparing to step closer. Not yet, but soon. Because some stories need time to unfold. And some kindnesses are best given when the person receiving them has proven they were never waiting to be rescued. David's first night on the job felt like stepping into a forgotten world. The building was old but functional, its polished floors whispering of long hours and small victories, its fluorescent lights flickering just enough to remind you nothing in life was perfect. The cleaning crew at Solunas Rivera operated like a quiet heartbeat after business hours, unseen but vital. And David, he fit right in. He wore his uniform like a second skin. Blue work shirt, name tag slightly crooked dark slacks too loose around the waist. He'd lost weight over the past weeks, though he hadn't noticed until he saw himself in the break room mirror. Lena sat curled on a beanbag chair in the corner, nibbling crackers, her blanket tucked around her like a shield. A donated tablet played gentle cartoons at low volume. She looked up every now and then, giving him a thumbs up as he walked past with a mop or empty trash bin. He worked fast, carefully, without complaint. He scrubbed floors, sanitized restrooms, vacuumed long corridors, and never once slowed unless it was to glance back at his daughter. That night, around 10:45 p.m., something unusual happened. He was buffing the hallway tiles on the executive level of floor they were only occasionally assigned when he heard the unmistakable click of high heels echoing down the hallway. He looked up, startled. A woman in a dark gray pantsuit turned the corner. Tall, confident, her face unreadable but familiar. Too familiar. He recognized her not just from a single moment, but from several. The blurred glimpses outside the diner, the laundromat window, even a faint memory of her near the park weeks ago. She had been there just at the edges. She stopped a few feet from him. "You cleaned this floor already?" she asked, voice cool but not cold. "Just finishing up, ma'am," he replied, moving the buffer aside. She nodded. "I've seen you before." He froze. She didn't smile. Didn't soften. But she didn't look away either. "I'm Claire Hartwell," she said simply. "I oversee several of the companies we contract with." David's heart dropped. So this was someone important. Dangerous, maybe. The kind of person who had the power to give or take in a single sentence. "I hope everything's been satisfactory," he said carefully. Claire tilted her head. "You're not just a janitor." He blinked. "No, ma'am. Yes, I am. Right now I am." You weren't always," she said. "Your hands, your posture. You used to lead people. It wasn't a question." David nodded slowly. Facilities team lead, then a shift manager. Until... Well, I got fired. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" He hesitated, but something in her expression made him tell the truth. "My daughter had a fever. Daycare closed. No family. I brought her with me to work. I kept her safe. Didn't let her near any danger or equipment. But someone reported it, and they let you go. They didn't even ask why David said." His voice wasn't bitter, just worn. "Policy's policy." Claire was silent. The hallway buzzed softly with the electric hum of lights. "You didn't try to appeal?" she asked. He gave a dry smile. "Tried. But HR didn't care. I didn't have a voice that mattered." Claire looked past him down the hallway, then back again. "You do now," she said quietly. David frowned. "I'm sorry," but she didn't explain. Instead, she turned and walked away, her heels echoing like punctuation. That weekend, David worked a double shift. Lena's fever had broken, but her cough lingered, and he was saving for her next pediatric visit. They'd found a tiny sublet, a basement room in a retired teacher's home, who charged them less than market rent because the little girl reminds me of my granddaughter. It was small, damp, and not very pretty, but to Lena it was a castle. She drew a flower on the wall with her crayons and labeled it Home. David watched her sleep that night on a real mattress for the first time in weeks. He didn't cry, but his hands trembled when he reached to adjust her blanket. Monday morning came with unexpected news. At the end of his shift, the HR lead at Solunas Rivera handed him a sealed envelope. "Upper admin wants you to see this," she said. "No idea what it's about." David opened it cautiously. Inside was a simple letter. "Mr. Torres, your work has been noticed. We'd like to offer you a trial supervisory position overseeing the rotating night crews at 3 buildings, including the Hartwell Tech Center. This position includes benefits. We'd like to discuss more in person. C.H. Claire Hartwell." He sat on the edge of the bench in the break room, letter in hand, heart pounding. Lena looked up from her coloring book. "Is it a good letter?" David smiled, wide, unguarded, real. "It's a very good letter." But what David didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Claire had gone home that night after their conversation and pulled out a dusty box from her closet. Inside, an old employee badge from 1996, a janitor's uniform, a photo of her at 8 years old sitting behind a mop cart bundled in a coat too big for her tiny frame, and a letter from a former boss. "You don't belong in the shadows. Find your light." She had carried that with her through every promotion, every sleepless night in boardrooms full of people who never knew her story. Until she met someone who reminded her why she'd never forgotten it, and why maybe it was finally time to give someone else the chance she once so desperately needed. David stood outside the Hartwell Tech Center, the letter still folded in the inside pocket of his work jacket, worn thin at the elbows. A drizzle freckled the pavement. Behind him, Lena twirled in her too big raincoat, pretending the building was a castle and she was a royal inspector there to check if the floors sparkled. "I'll be back soon, okay," he said, kneeling to her eye level. "You stay with Ms. Dolores in the break room. She's got snacks." Lena gave him a mock salute. "Yes, Captain." He couldn't help but smile. Every step forward lately felt like dragging a mountain with him, but Lena made it lighter. She always did. Inside the executive wing, David felt the difference immediately. Carpets thick enough to hush your doubts. Glass walls so clean they looked invisible. A receptionist with sharp eyeliner and sharper eyes offered him coffee. He declined. "Miss Hartwell will be with you shortly," she said. He nodded and waited on a leather couch that probably cost more than his entire car. But the moment Claire walked in, everything else faded. She didn't wear the intimidating suit today, just a navy blouse and slacks, no makeup, and a tired but genuine smile. She motioned for him to follow her into a quiet conference room. "Mr. Torres," she said, folding her arms gently. "Thank you for coming." Of course, David replied, still unsure whether to sit or stand. Claire gestured to the seat across from her. He sat. "I'm not going to bury the lead," she said. "You've been recommended by multiple staff for the open night crew supervisor position. That's not common. Most hires come from within." David tried to find words. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," Claire said. Then after a pause, "And if it helps, it comes with benefits. Medical, dental. For dependents, too." David exhaled slowly, the air shaky in his lungs. "Look," he said, his voice quieter now, "I've worked hard my whole life. Not always smart, maybe, but always hard. I've cleaned hospitals after night shifts, repaired heating units in 100-degree basements, mopped up messes no one talks about. But I've never felt like anyone was watching. Like it mattered." Claire didn't blink. "It did," she said. "And it does." Then she reached under the table and slid over a red folder. Inside, neatly printed on cream paper, was a file labeled Torres David Observation and Recommendation Notes, initiated by Claire Hartwell. David stared at it. "You've been watching me?" he asked, not with fear, but confusion. "Not spying," Claire said. "Observing. Ever since that night outside Rexton. You probably didn't see me. I was leaving late. You were walking away with your daughter holding her like she was glass and lightning at once." David's throat tightened. Claire continued, "I followed you, not to interfere, just to remember. Because a long time ago, someone watched me walk home from a janitorial shift with my little brother asleep on my back. Someone believed in me before I could spell the word ambition, and I never got to pay that forward." David sat back in stunned silence. "You're offering me this job because I remind you of you?" he asked softly. Claire shook her head. "I'm offering it to you because you've earned it." The resemblance. "That's just the part that makes me need to." The room held its breath between them. "I won't let you down," David said. "I know." That night, David didn't tell Lena everything just that he might be getting a promotion. She jumped into his arms and made him pinky promise that if he became a boss, he wouldn't be too serious to still make pancakes in funny shapes. He promised. And when she fell asleep on their mattress curled against a stuffed bear missing one eye, David sat quietly at the edge of the bed, rereading the letter from Claire and the observation notes again and again. The kindness that had shadowed him wasn't luck, it was choice, and it had a face now. At work, things changed quickly. Supervising 3 buildings wasn't easy. The staff varied wildly. Young people juggling 2 jobs, retired veterans trying to stay active, single mothers who clocked in after putting their kids to sleep. David saw them all, understood them. He implemented rotating shifts to help parents get home early. He arranged weekend potlucks on site to ease the loneliness night workers often carried. He kept a locked drawer filled with extra baby wipes, granola bars, and dollar store socks. People started calling it the kindness drawer. Claire stopped by once a week. She never stayed long, just walked the floors, greeted staff, left handwritten thank you notes tucked into lockers. David noticed every gesture. So did others. One day, weeks later, he found a note in his locker. "You changed the way this place feels. You made me believe it wasn't just about work, but about being seen. Thank you for giving us that." It wasn't signed. He didn't need it to be. Kindness didn't always wear a name tag. And sometimes the most powerful transformations start not with grand gestures, but with someone quietly noticing and then choosing not to walk away. David folded the note, carefully slipped it into the same red folder Claire had once given him. He labeled the folder, now Kindness File, and in it he started collecting more than papers. He collected every quiet reminder that even in a world that often looked away, someone watching with empathy can change everything. The first time David brought Lena to the main building after being officially promoted, she held his hand tighter than usual. The sun had just started rising behind the high-rises of downtown, casting long, gold-tipped shadows across the pavement. For the first time in weeks, the morning didn't feel like a finish line. It felt like a beginning. "Are we allowed to go in the front door now?" Lena whispered, eyeing the revolving glass entrance. David grinned. "Guess we are." As they walked inside, David noticed the receptionist, the same one who had once glanced at him like he didn't belong, now offering Lena a sticker with a warm smile. A butterfly. Lena placed it proudly on her tiny jacket. Claire was waiting near the elevator. She wasn't wearing a suit. Instead, a simple cardigan and dark jeans made her look less like an executive and more like someone's thoughtful older sister. The look on her face when she saw Lena was the softest David had ever seen from her. "Good morning," she said to both of them. Lena hesitated, then reached into her pocket and handed Claire a folded piece of paper. "I made you a picture. It's you, me, and Daddy. You're smiling." Claire unfolded it, 3 stick figures all holding hands under what looked like a huge yellow sun and a tall building with a heart on top. Claire blinked quickly, then smiled. "Thank you, Lena. This is perfect." She crouched beside the girl and whispered something David couldn't hear. Lena nodded solemnly, then skipped off toward the break room, humming. Claire rose. "She's beautiful. She's my whole world," David said, watching her go. There was a pause before Claire spoke again. "You know, we don't often get a chance to rewrite the stories we come from. But sometimes life gives us a pen again." David nodded slowly. And a clean page. The following weeks passed in a blur of purposeful motion. David dove into the role with quiet determination, building bridges between departments, listening more than he spoke, and always leading by example. He wasn't trying to climb any ladder, he just wanted to make the floor solid for others to stand on. One afternoon, he found a newer janitor, Michael, barely 19, asleep beside a supply closet, clearly exhausted. David didn't yell. Instead, he sat down beside him and asked him what was going on. Michael's eyes welled up. "My mom's in chemo. I'm working nights here and delivering food during the day. I'm trying, but I'm so tired." David helped adjust his schedule to something humane, started a quiet donation pool among the staff, and gave the boy a ride home when he didn't have one. It wasn't charity. It was what someone once did for him in their own way, and in the background of it all, Claire kept appearing. Always just when he didn't expect her, offering a cup of coffee, dropping by with notes, sometimes just watching from the back during a staff meeting. She never brought up her past, never explained more. But one Friday night, everything shifted. It started with a phone call. David was finishing paperwork when the security desk rang through. "Mr. Torres, there's a woman asking for you. Says it's personal." Confused, David made his way down and found Claire standing by the lobby window staring out into the rain. She looked different. Vulnerable, somehow. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. David walked closer. "Are you okay?" Claire didn't answer right away. She stared out at the storm for another moment before turning to face him. "My father was a janitor," she said, "single parent. We used to clean office buildings just like this at night. I did homework in the supply closets. Ate dinner from vending machines. I hated the smell of bleach because it meant we'd be here until 2 a.m. David stood silently. "He lost jobs because of me," she continued. "One night I fell asleep under a desk in an executive suite. A man found me and told my father we were a liability. He was fired the next morning." David's breath caught. "I remember standing in the rain that day," Claire said, voice tight, "holding my dad's hand, thinking, if I ever got powerful enough, I'd find people like him, like me, and do it differently." David exhaled slowly. "You were that kid." Claire nodded. "I was." The rain drummed harder against the glass. "I saw you that night outside Rexton," she added. "You didn't see me, but the way you held your daughter. I remembered my father's hands, calloused, gentle, always holding me like I was the only thing keeping him standing." David swallowed hard. He had no words, just the ache in his chest that told him something sacred had just been shared. Claire stepped closer. "I didn't help you out of pity, David," she said. "I helped because someone once gave me a chance when the world didn't, and I've been looking for the right person to pay that forward to." She looked away, then smiled softly. "Turns out..." He was already holding the mop. That night, David walked home in the rain with Lena sleeping against his shoulder, her cheek pressed to his collarbone. His jacket was soaked, his shoes squished with each step. But he didn't care, because for the first time in a long time he wasn't walking into the dark. He was walking toward something. And behind him, far above, a light remained on in Claire's corner office, not because anyone forgot, but because someone was still watching. Still believing, still remembering what it means to hold the hand of someone you once were, and never, ever let go. Claire stood in front of the long, narrow window of her office, staring down at the street below. The city buzzed in its usual rhythm, cars inching forward, umbrellas blooming under the drizzle, and people weaving between sidewalk puddles like they had somewhere better to be. But her eyes weren't on the crowd. They were searching for one figure, a man in a worn jacket and a little girl with a bounce in her step. When she finally spotted them, something in her chest eased. She watched as David lifted Lena into his arms just to avoid a puddle and carried her the rest of the way with a laugh that echoed through the glass. Claire's hand slowly lowered the blinds. Still watching came a voice behind her. It was Dolores, her longtime assistant and only real confidant in the office. Claire turned. "Habit, I guess." Dolores smiled knowingly and walked in, placing a folder on the desk. "This is more than habit, Claire." Claire didn't answer. She sat, glancing down at the folder, Community Programs Internal Staff Uplift Proposal. The draft David had worked on after hours, building on his idea to formalize support systems for night shift employees, rotating childcare hours, food assistance referrals, even optional mentorships. "What do you see in him?" Dolores asked gently. Claire looked up. "Everything I once needed." Dolores paused. "You ever think he might need more than just a professional opportunity?" Claire's gaze dropped to the folder again. Her voice softened. "I think he needs someone who doesn't walk away." Downstairs, David moved through the janitorial wing like someone who finally knew where he belonged. He checked timesheets, replaced a faulty supply scanner, and even fixed a broken coffee machine with a paperclip and a prayer. He didn't know why Claire's confession had stayed with him so deeply. But every time he looked at her now, he didn't just see the CEO who had offered him a job. He saw the girl who had once stood in the rain holding her father's hand and built an empire from that memory. But something inside him kept whispering, "Don't get too close." It wasn't fear. It was survival. He'd spent so many years making sure Lena had everything she needed, even when that meant keeping the world out. Love was a luxury. Trust was a risk. But then Claire had looked at him not like a boss, not like a benefactor, but like an equal, a kindred soul. And David didn't know what to do with that. Later that night, after Lena had gone to bed, snuggled into her blanket fort with her drawing book and a flashlight, David sat at the kitchen table staring at the proposal he'd written. His handwriting was still rough around the edges, but the ideas were solid, real, needed. He glanced across the room where Lena's backpack lay open, crayons spilling out like confetti. One drawing caught his eye. 3 figures again, this time under a tree. The same 3 stick people, but this time Claire had a crown. David chuckled under his breath. She was royalty to Lena the Queen, who saved their castle. And maybe, just maybe, something more to him too. The next morning, David arrived at work early to finalize logistics for a Saturday cleanup event he'd volunteered to organize, a way to get staff involved with the community while earning bonus hours. But when he reached the bulletin board, something stopped him cold. Pinned there under the event flyer was a smaller sheet of paper. Typed, "Clean. Quiet. Meet me on the rooftop at 6:15 p.m. C.H." His stomach flipped. At 6:13, he was already waiting, heart-racing hands jammed into his coat pockets. The rooftop was quiet, a small urban garden nestled behind solar panels and HVAC units, one of those hidden perks executives never talked about. Claire arrived 2 minutes later, hair pulled back, coat flaring behind her in the soft evening wind. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she walked to the railing and looked out. David joined her in silence. Then, softly, she asked, "What's the scariest thing you've had to face as a father?" David didn't hesitate. "Failing her." Claire nodded slowly. "Same." He turned to her, confused. "My brother," she said. "I raised him after our father died. He was 12. I was barely out of college. I wasn't ready, but I had no choice." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the weight of years she rarely spoke of. "I missed parent-teacher meetings. I forgot birthdays. I buried myself in work because I didn't know how to be everything he needed." David said nothing. He knew that kind of guilt. The kind that didn't raise its voice, just stayed quietly in the background, reminding you could have done better. Claire turned to him. "I see the way you are with Lena. How she laughs louder when you're near. How she looks for your face before she does anything new. You're not failing her, David. You're giving her a story she'll carry into every room she ever walks into." David's throat tightened. And then she stepped closer. "I'm not asking for anything from you," she said. "Not out of gratitude. Not because I offered you a job. But if there's space in your life, not just as a father or as an employee, but as a man, I'd like to stand in that space." David looked at her, truly looked. He saw the rain-soaked girl, the iron-willed executive, the woman who had reached back in time, not just to pull someone forward, but to meet them where they stood. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the invisible thread between 2 people who had spent years trying to protect others and maybe finally found someone who could protect them too. He didn't answer with words. Just reached out and gently took her hand, and for once, neither of them had to be strong alone. The following Monday began like any other. Lena had insisted on wearing her lucky shoes, a pair of pink sneakers that lit up when she walked. David chuckled as he knelt to tie the laces. "You know you're going to blind someone in the elevator, right?" She grinned. "Then they'll be happy. Lights make people smile. He couldn't argue with that logic. At work, Claire was already in motion navigating a gauntlet of meetings and internal strategy sessions. She wore that usual poise of hers, but there was a softness under it now, like someone walking through the world, not just thinking about numbers, but about hearts. She glanced out the window more than once that morning, and each time she hoped the man with the warm eyes and quiet strength would glance up too. At 10:47 a.m. everything changed. A fire alarm blared from the east wing of the building. People spilled from conference rooms and cubicles, confused but not panicked. Protocol was followed: orderly exits, head counts, safety checks. David had been on the third floor inspecting new mop inventory when he heard the alert. Within seconds, he'd slung his radio over his shoulder and moved toward the stairwell. By the time he reached the second-floor hallway, the smoke detectors had gone off and a shrill cry rose above the din. A child's cry. He knew instantly. Lena. Backtracking through the thinning hallway, he found her near the admin daycare center, pressed against the wall, eyes wide with fear. The daycare staff had already evacuated, but somehow Lena had darted back in looking for her crayon box. "Daddy," she cried, arms outstretched. Without a word, he scooped her up and shielded her face with his jacket. Smoke was beginning to creep from one of the side storage rooms, just a wiring short, he guessed, but enough to cloud vision and panic the senses. He moved quickly, years of janitorial familiarity guiding his steps, knowing which hallways dead-ended and which ones doubled as emergency exits. When he burst through the east stairwell, Lena clinging to him like a koala, a wave of relief swept over him until he heard a voice yell from above. "There's still someone on 5." Instinct kicked in. David passed Lena to a waiting security officer and turned back without hesitation. The building's upper floors weren't in flames yet, but every second counted. Claire had been coordinating with emergency response teams outside when she saw David disappear back into the building. "No," she shouted, but it was too late. People saw her expression change. The calm corporate executive now looked like someone whose entire world had just walked back into danger. 15 minutes crawled by, then 20. A few smoke-touched employees stumbled out, a shaken intern, a coughing maintenance worker, but no David. Claire stood frozen. Every memory, every quiet moment they'd shared replayed in her mind like still frames from a reel that might end too soon. And then the doors burst open. David emerged, soot-streaked shirt torn at the shoulder, carrying an older employee, Janine, the accounts payable lead, in his arms. The crowd gasped. Claire didn't. She exhaled finally, and her hand went to her mouth, eyes filling. He laid Janine gently on the paramedic stretcher and turned, expecting silence. Instead, the crowd applauded. It wasn't loud, it wasn't orchestrated, but it was real. That afternoon, the office buzzed in a way it hadn't in years. No one was talking about deadlines or stock options. They were talking about the janitor who ran back into a building for someone who wasn't his daughter, someone he barely knew. They were talking about David Torres. By 3 p.m., someone had posted a photo of the moment he carried Janine out, snapped by an intern. By 6 p.m., it had gone viral within the company intranet, captioned, "Sometimes the strongest ones wear aprons, not suits." Claire printed the image and quietly slipped it into a folder labeled Future Leadership. That evening, David sat on the worn couch in his apartment, arms wrapped around Lena, who had fallen asleep mid-cartoon. Claire stood at the open door. "You didn't have to go back in," she said softly. "I couldn't not go," he replied. "That's somebody's mom. Somebody's everything." She stepped closer. "You didn't just save her, David. You reminded people what real leadership looks like." He looked away. "I'm just a janitor." "No," she said, her voice low but sure. "You're the kind of person I want this company to be proud of. And the kind I—" She stopped herself. David met her eyes, and this time it wasn't a silent understanding. It was a confession neither of them needed to complete. That night, long after Lena had been tucked in and the city's lights shimmered like stars spilled across asphalt, David stepped onto his tiny balcony. Claire joined him, holding 2 mugs of tea. The world still spun, but in that moment for once it didn't feel like it was spinning without them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, two people who had carried more than their share of weight, and finally found someone to carry it with, because sometimes the heroes weren't in capes or corner offices. Sometimes they were the ones with calloused hands and soft hearts, and sometimes the world noticed just in time. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the east-facing windows of the office building, painting golden streaks across the marble floor. The lobby buzzed with whispers not of deals or deadlines, but of David. People who had never noticed him before now offered nod smiles, even coffee. Some clapped him on the back as he passed. The same uniform he wore every day now seemed to carry weight, not invisibility. But David remained quiet, polite, grateful, humble. His only concern that morning had been Lena's scraped knee from the chaos the day before. She was fine, bandaged, and smiling. But it reminded him how fragile things still were. One misstep, one accident, and everything could change. That's why when Claire's assistant told him she wanted to see him in her office, his gut twisted. Now he asked. She said she cleared her schedule. That wasn't normal. Claire stood by her window again when he entered, but this time she didn't wait for him to speak. She turned immediately and handed him a folder. Her eyes searched his. David opened it slowly. At the top was a letter, embossed with the company's logo. Offer of promotion. Director of Facilities and Community Engagement. He blinked, scanned the page again. His salary tripled. Benefits extended. Child care support. A private office. And below that, a note in Claire's own handwriting. I believe in what you're building. I want the world to see it. He looked up, stunned. Claire, I'm not. You are, she interrupted, gently but firmly. You don't see it yet, but everyone else does. The janitor who stepped up and carried someone from the fire. That wasn't luck. That was you. The man who stayed late, submitted proposals, remembered every face and name in this building. That's you. David's throat tightened. I never finished college, he said quietly. I've never led a team. I don't wear a suit. Claire stepped forward. Neither did my father. She said, her voice softer now. But he led me through the darkest years of my life. And when he died, I spent every day trying to become someone he would have been proud of. You remind me of him. David looked away, overwhelmed. Why me, Claire? Why now? There was a long pause before she spoke again. Because I was that kid. He froze. She walked past her desk, lifted a photograph from her bookshelf and handed it to him. A faded image, a little girl no older than Lena holding hands with a man in a janitor's uniform. Both were drenched in rain, but they were laughing. Behind them, a small building with a flickering neon sign, Mercy Diner. He used to take me there when we couldn't afford the heating bill. We'd share one plate of fries and he'd draw smiley faces in the ketchup. That's how I remember feeling safe. Her voice caught slightly. He brought me to work with him once when I was sick. His boss saw us and fired him on the spot. David's eyes widened. Claire nodded. We spent 3 nights in a motel after that using coins he'd saved in a jar labeled Hope. Her voice steadied again. When I saw you that day carrying Lena rushing to explain yourself to security, I didn't see an employee. I saw him. I saw me. I followed you that afternoon. I watched you leave that building with dignity, even when it hurt. And I knew I had to find a way to make it right, not just for you, but for every kid like I was. David looked at her speechless. His chest felt tight with a mix of awe, emotion, and something else rising, slowly recognition. Claire continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I needed you to know you earned this on your own. The silence between them was full, but not heavy. David set the photo down. You didn't just make it right, Claire. You made it matter. They stood there for a long moment. No titles, no walls, just 2 souls who'd carried pain in different shapes and had somehow met in the middle. Then Claire smiled gently. So, Director Torres, shall we change a few things together? He chuckled softly. Only if I get to bring my tool belt. That night, David sat with Lena on the edge of her bed. She was coloring again this time with new markers Claire had sent as a surprise. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to her drawing. She held it up proudly. A picture of their apartment, but brighter. Flowers in the window. 3 stick figures again, her David. And Claire now holding both their hands. "She's happy," Lena said, as if narrating for a stranger. "Because she's not alone anymore." David kissed the top of her head. "Neither are we, sweetheart." Across town, Claire stood on her own balcony staring at the stars. For the first time in years, she felt like her father would be proud not just of what she'd built, but of how she was building it now. Her phone buzzed. A message from David. "Thank you. For everything. For seeing us." She typed back slowly, carefully. "I didn't just see you. I recognized you." She paused, then added, "And I'm not walking away." In the stillness of the night, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of healing beginning to take root. A janitor no more. A girl no longer waiting. A company about to be led not just by strategy, but by compassion. And at the center of it all, one man, one child, and one woman who had once been that kid, who now held the power to rewrite what dignity and leadership looked like together. The day David officially started as Director of Facilities and Community Engagement. He arrived in the same uniform he'd worn for the past 3 years, creased khakis, steel-toed boots, and a plain button-down shirt. But something in his posture had shifted. His shoulders were straighter, his steps quieter but more certain. He wasn't there to play a part. He was there to be one. Claire met him by the elevator on the executive floor. No grand announcement, no staged photo op, just a quiet nod and a smile that said, "This is exactly where you're meant to be." "You sure about this title?" David had asked her once. "It's a mouthful." Claire had smiled. "You're not just running facilities anymore, David. You're rebuilding how people feel when they walk through those doors." By noon, the shift had already begun. He sat in on a departmental meeting where junior staff actually spoke voices, trembling at first, then growing stronger as he nodded and jotted notes. When someone brought up a broken AC vent that had been ignored for months, he didn't deflect. He pulled out his phone, typed it into a work order system, and said, "We'll handle this by end of day. You have my word." A stunned silence, then applause. Not because the AC would be fixed, but because someone listened. Later that week, David launched a new initiative, Humans First. A series of employee-led lunches, anonymous feedback boxes, and monthly spotlight stories to highlight overlooked team members, cafeteria staff, security guards, mailroom workers. It was Claire's idea originally, but it was David who brought it to life. He called the first meeting himself, inviting a dozen employees from across departments. At the center of the table sat Lena's old teddy bear dressed in a tiny paper name tag, Hope. The room chuckled, but they also listened. And for the first time in years, people looked at each other not through titles but through stories. David's transformation didn't come without challenges. Some executives raised eyebrows behind closed doors. A janitor in a leadership meeting. Does he even have a college degree? Is this diversity, or just pity in disguise? Claire shut it down. In one boardroom during a particularly tense quarterly review, an older VP questioned David's qualifications. Claire leaned forward, locking eyes with the man. "Tell me," she said coolly, "when was the last time you carried someone out of a burning building?" The room fell silent. David didn't gloat. He never had. He simply leaned in and said, "I'm not here to impress anyone. I'm here to make sure the next person who walks in with a dream doesn't leave feeling invisible." That was the moment the tide turned. Outside the office, life changed too. Lena thrived in her new school. She had friends, now art supplies that weren't shared from a public bin, and teachers who called her bright, not behind. David picked her up every day at 3:15 sharp, sometimes with a smoothie, sometimes with news about a leaky pipe he'd fixed, but always with a smile. Claire came by some afternoons, usually with a second smoothie, and Lena, without asking, always offered her the first sip. One Friday evening, David invited Claire and her assistant to dinner at a small restaurant tucked between two laundromats. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. A place Lena called Our Victory Spot. They ordered fries, shared stories, and laughed over spilled ketchup. Then Lena, ever observant, turned to Claire and said, "You don't wear heels when you're with us." Claire looked down at her simple flats, then back at the little girl. "Guess I don't need them here," she said. David chuckled. "She's got a way of stripping down your walls." Claire's eyes met his. "I think that's exactly what I needed." Later that night, as David walked Claire to her car, the air warm, and still he paused. "You know," he said, voice low, "I used to think love was for people who had time for it, who didn't have to worry about rent or lunch money, or if their kid would get teased for second-hand shoes." Claire turned slowly, and now he exhaled. "Now I think maybe love is for the ones who never stopped showing up anyway." She stepped closer, even if they're covered in mop water and drywall dust. He grinned, especially then. They didn't kiss, not yet, but as she reached for his hand and he let her, something quieter, deeper passed between them. Respect, recognition, and hope. Back at home, Lena had left a drawing on the fridge. 3 figures again, this time with a heart over their heads, and in big, colorful letters, "Sometimes families aren't found. They're made." David stared at it long after Lena had gone to sleep, and he realized maybe this wasn't just a new chapter. Maybe this was the book he'd always wanted to write now with someone who knew the pages before he ever turned them. Because love wasn't about timing. It was about presence, about the people who saw you when you were invisible, and chose to stay. It had been exactly 1 year since that morning, since the security guard's raised hand, since the quiet shame of walking out with his daughter in his arms and the cruel finality of the word terminated. And yet, standing at the front of the community room now wearing a button-down shirt that Lena had chosen, hair trimmed slightly better, and heart steady, David Torres didn't feel like the man who once begged for a second chance. He felt like the man who gave them. The walls around him buzzed with life staff from every department, their families, retired employees, even a few new hires who had heard the janitor's story and come just to see if it was true. Claire stood by the doorway, leaning against the frame, a soft smile playing on her lips. Lena sat cross-legged in the front row, a paper sign taped to her chest that read, "My dad's the boss," and "My hero." The room quieted as David stepped to the small podium. No mic, no teleprompter, just a simple note card in his hand and a heart too full to hide. He cleared his throat. "I'm not gonna lie. I've stood in this building soaked in rain, covered in bleach once with gum on my shoe and once with a sandwich stuck in my back pocket. But today I stand in gratitude." Laughter rippled softly. David glanced at Claire. Her eyes were on him, steady, proud. "I used to believe that people like me didn't belong in places like this. That once the world labels you maintenance or just a dad, you keep your head down and stay out of the way. But then something happened. Something small. Something big. All at once." He looked toward Lena. "Someone believed in me." His voice cracked just enough to make every person in the room lean forward. "I wasn't given this role because I wore the right tie or had the perfect resume. I was given it because someone saw the kind of leader who doesn't leave, who stays when the hallway floods, who shows up after they're told not to, who holds a child's hand tighter when everything's falling apart." He folded the card and put it in his pocket. "And today, if I can leave you with anything, it's this: we all carry keys. Not just to open doors for ourselves, but to unlock someone else's future. You may never know the weight a smile lifts, or how far a kind word carries. But believe me, sometimes that's the miracle." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, of hearts opening, of walls falling, of seeds being planted. Claire was the first to stand. The room followed one by one until everyone was on their feet. No music played, no confetti dropped, but it didn't need to. This was a standing ovation not for a title but for a life rebuilt one choice at a time. That night, David and Claire sat outside the modest brownstone he now called home, one he'd bought with his first bonus, not because it was flashy but because it had a porch where Lena could paint sunsets. The summer air was soft, filled with fireflies and the faint hum of distant laughter from neighboring yards. Claire held a glass of sweet tea in one hand, her other wrapped around David's. He broke the silence first. "Do you ever think about that day? The fire alarm, the chaos security pushing me out?" She nodded slowly. "I think about what would have happened if I'd walked away." He looked at her. "But you didn't." "No," she said gently, "because I knew what it felt like to be you, and I knew what it meant to be seen." They were quiet a moment more. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder. "David, I think I love your daughter's drawings more than any painting I've ever bought." He smiled. "That's good, because there's a whole stack of family portraits she's planning to hang in your apartment." Claire chuckled softly. "She already assigned me a favorite color and a superhero nickname. She told me, David said, 'You're Captain Calm.'" She laughed again, an easy, full sound that made something settle inside him. Not excitement, not butterflies. Something truer. Peace. Inside, Lena had fallen asleep on the couch, arms wrapped around a pillow shaped like a golden star. Her bedtime book, The Invisible Boy, lay open beside her. She had underlined a line in pencil, even though she knew she wasn't supposed to write in books when someone sees you, you're not invisible anymore. David knelt beside her and kissed her forehead, then gently lifted her in his arms and carried her to bed. As he pulled the blanket over her and turned off the light, he hesitated, then turned it back on. Just the small nightlight shaped like a moon. He left it glowing. Not because she was afraid of the dark, but because she wasn't anymore. As David stepped back outside, Claire reached for his hand again. "What made you leave it on?" she asked. He smiled. "Because sometimes we don't just need to be seen once. We need someone to keep the light on until we can find the switch ourselves." She nodded, eyes glistening. Then slowly she leaned in. And this time, finally they kissed. Not as boss and employee. Not even as two people healing, but as two lights left on for each other. In the distance, the city moved as it always had. But for David, Claire, and Lena, something had shifted forever. Not in noise, but in hope. Because love, when born from kindness, doesn't just change a story. It rewrites the ending. Sometimes the people who save us don't raise their voice. They just raise an umbrella. And sometimes the most unexpected love grows from a single act of silent grace. That's what happened here in the story of a man who was fired for bringing his little girl to work, and a woman who saw herself in that child, because once she was that kid. What would you have done in Maya's place, or Jake's? Have you ever crossed paths with someone who reminded you of your younger self, someone you just couldn't walk away from? Let us know where you're watching from and what part of this story touched you most. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, subscribe to join a growing community that believes in love, kindness, and second chances. Thank you for watching. We'll be here with the light on.